The early morning sun poured through the arched windows of the penthouse like golden silk, illuminating the textured walls with a warm, dreamlike glow. Samantha Hale's eyes fluttered open slowly, her lashes damp from the restless sleep that barely held her together. For a few suspended moments, she didn't move. Her breath was shallow, her limbs heavy. There was a subtle scent in the air, something clean, expensive, layered with citrus and cedar. And that's when she knew something was wrong. This wasn't her hotel room. The sheets beneath her were too smooth, the bed too vast, the silence too complete. Her fingers tightened around the linen as she sat upright abruptly, heart clattering in her chest. Her first frantic glance told her she was still in her white dress, creased but intact, the same one she'd worn to celebrate her graduation the night before. A tiny relief. But it was short-lived. As her eyes swept across the room, she registered the high ceilings, a sculptural light fixture, the meticulously arranged bookshelves, and the gleaming floors that reflected the early light like water. Outside the tall windows, Barcelona stretched toward the horizon in muted golden stone, the unmistakable silhouette of La Sagrada Familia standing sentry in the distance. She didn't remember arriving here. A knot of nausea curled in her stomach. Where had the night gone? The last thing she recalled clearly was laughing with her friends in a crowded bar tucked deep within the Gothic quarter. There had been drinks, too many maybe, and loud music and confetti in her hair. Then, darkness, a chasm in her memory. Before panic could take complete hold, a voice cut through the quiet like silk being torn gently. "Good morning." She turned, startled. There he was, leaning lightly against the doorframe as if he'd been waiting for her to awaken. A man tall and composed, his presence steady without being intrusive. His dark hair was slightly tousled, a remnant of sleep or deliberation she couldn't tell, and he wore a navy button-down with the sleeves casually rolled to his forearms. There was something unusually still about him, as though he carried a gravity that demanded attention rather than asked for it. In his hands, 2 cups of coffee steamed softly. "I brought you this," he said, stepping forward, his voice quiet but certain. "You might need it." She stared at him, her voice caught somewhere between her mind and mouth. "I didn't mean to startle you," he added gently. "You're safe." The words were meant to calm, but they only deepened her confusion. Who are you?" she managed, throat dry. Dimitri Alekos," he said, placing one of the cups on the nightstand. "We met last night. You probably don't remember." The name didn't register. Not yet. She tried to piece something together. His face, his tone, a memory of his voice among the haze, but nothing came. "You were outside Casabaglio," he continued, watching her with a respectful distance. "It was late. There were a few men bothering you. You were disoriented. I stepped in." Her pulse quickened. "And then what?" "They didn't take go away very well," he said, a trace of ice behind his composed exterior. "You didn't have your phone. You didn't have your hotel key. So I brought you here. You passed out before we even made it through the elevator." She clutched the sheets closer to her chest as if they were armor. "Why didn't you call the police?" He sat in the nearby chair without asking, elbows on his knees, holding the other coffee cup in both hands. "I thought about it," he said, "but you'd had enough attention. I didn't want you to wake up in a hospital or a police station scared and alone." She hesitated, her instincts wrestling with disbelief. "Did you touch me?" "No," he said, not looking away. "You slept here." "I slept in the room across the hall. I had the staff bring water and something comfortable, but you were out cold. I didn't even change your shoes." The tension in her shoulders eased an inch, not because she suddenly trusted him, but because something in his voice, in the way he met her eyes, told her he was telling the truth. He wasn't fawning. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't flirting. If anything, he looked almost burdened, like he'd done this before. Samantha took the coffee and wrapped her hands around the warmth like a lifeline. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He arched an eyebrow. "For what?" "For this. For you having to help me. For not remembering." "You don't need to apologize," Dimitri said. "But you should probably have something to eat. The kitchen sent something up." "I should go," she said, quickly. I don't want to be a problem." "You're not a problem," he replied, standing. "I'll call a car, but eat something first, please." He disappeared down the hallway without another word. She remained frozen on the bed, staring into the dark liquid in her cup, her hands still trembling slightly. Later, seated awkwardly at the sleek glass dining table, Samantha tried to make sense of the man who now stood across from her, casually slicing into a croissant. His movements were deliberate, controlled. He looked like someone used to silence, someone who thrived in minimalism. There was a calmness to him she envied. "Do you remember anything?" he asked. "Fragments. Her friends dancing, the sound of heels on stone, a shadow leaning too close, but not him." She shook her head. "I don't usually drink like that," she said. "Actually, I don't drink at all," he nodded. "Then your friends let you down." A pause. "And the men you helped me from?" she asked. He didn't answer immediately. They weren't just flirting. She didn't ask him to elaborate. She didn't need to. Her stomach churned not from the food but from the implications. She reached for her water. "Thank you," she said finally, "for not leaving me." Dimitri gave her a quiet nod. "You don't owe me anything." And yet she felt she did. The ride down in the elevator was quiet. Samantha felt painfully out of place in her crumpled dress, her messy hair, while Dimitri stood beside her like a statue carved from restraint. He handed her a business card just as the car pulled up outside. "In case you need help while you're in the city." She looked at the card. Just his name. No title. No company. "Who are you?" she asked genuinely this time. He hesitated. "Someone who's made his fair share of mistakes." And with that, he opened the car door for her. As Barcelona slipped past the window, Samantha pressed the card to her chest, her heartbeat steadying. She didn't know who Dimitri Alekos really was, but she knew this. She hadn't just woken up in a stranger's home. She'd woken up at a crossroads, and something told her this was only the beginning. It had been 17 days since Samantha Hale returned from Barcelona, but the city clung to her in a way she couldn't shake. She thought that getting back home to San Diego would bring clarity, that slipping into routine would help her shelve what happened, or didn't happen, in that penthouse overlooking La Sagrada Familia. But normalcy had a strange way of becoming foreign when your world tilted overnight. She never called Dimitri. She didn't text. She didn't even look up his name online, though not for lack of temptation. The card he'd given her was still tucked into her wallet, the edges slightly worn now from where her fingers had brushed over it too often. She told herself she wouldn't reach out, not because she didn't want to, but because she didn't know what she'd even say. "Thank you for being kind when you didn't have to be. Thank you for saving me from something I don't fully remember." None of those words felt big enough. But life, stubborn, relentless, had other plans for her. On the first Monday of the new month, Samantha started her job as a junior psychologist at the Shoreline Wellness Center. It was a bright, ivy-wrapped building a few blocks from the water, known for its work with trauma patients and community outreach. The position had been competitive, and she'd fought for it, believing deeply in the center's mission. Her supervisor, Dr. Monica Lin, was a brilliant clinical psychologist with a zero-tolerance policy for incompetence and gossip. Samantha respected her instantly. Monica expected more than credentials. She demanded empathy wrapped in discipline, and Samantha was ready for the challenge, or at least she thought she was, until the Wednesday meeting. Monica called it a special team huddle, gathering staff in the main conference room, which overlooked the Pacific in soft, muted light. "We've just secured a new grant," Monica announced, not even attempting to mask her pride. "A generous 2-year commitment from a private donor. He'll be visiting today and we'll be discussing the expansion of our trauma services." Samantha barely registered the words, until Monica continued. "Please welcome Mr. Dimitri Alekos of the Alekos Foundation." Samantha froze. She turned slowly toward the doorway, her breath hitching. There he was, Dimitri Alekos. Only this time he wasn't a figure in the shadows of a Spanish sunrise. He was sharply dressed in a tailored charcoal blazer, his presence, as composed as it had been that morning in Barcelona, except now the context was different. He wasn't a stranger offering rescue. He was a philanthropist standing in her professional world. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. If he was surprised to see her, he didn't show it. He offered a polite nod to the room, his expression inscrutable. Samantha looked away first. The meeting continued in a blur. Dimitri outlined his vision for the partnership: expanded services for at-risk youth, funding for school-based mental health initiatives, and a pilot program for digital trauma recovery tools. He spoke not with the ego of a billionaire, but with the precision of a man who understood the landscape of pain and how easily people fell through its cracks. When the meeting ended, Monica pulled Samantha aside. "Would you mind giving Mr. Alekos a tour of the facility? I think your perspective would be valuable." Samantha hesitated. "Of course." She found him waiting by the glass wall overlooking the garden. "Mr. Alekos," she began, formal, professional, detached. He turned. "Samantha." His voice was lower now, softened by familiarity. He followed her silently as she walked him through the recovery rooms, the therapy spaces, the community board with pictures of smiling children and post-it notes of hope. "Aish, work here," he said finally, as if confirming something to himself. "I do. You didn't mention that. I didn't know I'd see you again." He stopped walking. She turned to face him. "Was it fate?" he asked quietly. "Or did you follow me here?" The edge of a smile tugged at her lips. "You think highly of yourself." He didn't return the smile. Instead, his gaze searched hers for something, maybe truth, maybe reassurance. "I didn't come here to cause problems." "You haven't. But you look like I have." Samantha glanced away. "I'm just trying to focus. This job matters. I know," he said. "That's why I'm here." They stood in silence for a moment, surrounded by the quiet hum of the building and the faint sound of ocean waves beyond its walls. "I read your letter," Dimitri said suddenly. She blinked. "What?" "The letter you wrote to the Tessa Alekos Memorial Fund 5 years ago. You didn't sign your full name, just Samantha H. But I remember it." Her throat tightened. That letter, written as a high school senior after losing a close friend to suicide, had been raw, unpolished, filled with the kind of pain you don't expect anyone to read. "You remember it?" "I kept it," he said. "It reminded me that we weren't alone." Samantha didn't know what to say. Her heart thundered. He wasn't just a man who had helped her. He was someone who had been watching the same storm from a different window. The rest of the tour passed in a daze. When they returned to the lobby, Monica thanked her with a nod and Dimitri extended his hand. "We'll be seeing each other," he said. "Professionally, of course." Samantha shook. His hand briefly. His skin was warm, his grip steady. It was the first time they had touched since that night, and everything about it felt different. Later that evening, she sat in her apartment and stared at the card again. The one she never threw away. The one that now made too much sense. Int. The days that followed, they saw each other often. Meetings, program launches, donor strategy sessions. Dimitri remained professional, composed, distant when he needed to be. But there were cracks. Moments where he asked her questions no one else did. Moments where she caught him watching her when he thought she wasn't looking. And she watched him too. He wasn't just a philanthropist. He was a man carrying something heavy beneath his tailored suit. Grief, guilt, responsibility. She noticed the way he avoided small talk. How he lingered in the therapy sessions longer than necessary. How he always gave more than he was asked. One night, after a particularly long meeting, they ended up in the wellness center garden, the moonlight casting silver across the grass. "I never asked," he said. "Did you ever write again? After the letter?" "I did," she said. "But I stopped sending them. I figured no one was reading." "I read every single one," he said softly. She looked at him, not as a billionaire or a benefactor, but as a man who, like her, had once stood at the edge of despair and chosen to stay. "I'm glad you did," she whispered. "So much of life hinges on chance. A delayed flight, a wrong turn, a drink too many. But sometimes chance isn't random. Sometimes it's the universe stitching two broken people into the same story. And though neither of them knew it yet, that story was only just beginning." In the weeks that followed, Samantha found herself navigating a terrain she hadn't prepared. 4. The complicated, charged space between professionalism and a growing emotional bond. At first, she tried to convince herself it was admiration. Dimitri Alekos was exactly the kind of partner any nonprofit dreamed of. Generous, driven, and fiercely dedicated to the cause. But it didn't take long before admiration blurred into curiosity. And curiosity for Samantha had always been a gateway to something deeper. They worked closely on developing a new trauma recovery program targeting underserved high school students across San Diego County. The project brought late nights, deep dives into community data, and more coffee-fueled meetings than she could count. She learned how he thought, analytically with sharp edges, and how he paused before offering opinions, as if weighing the emotional impact of every word. What surprised her most was the restraint. In a world where power often demanded attention, Dimitri moved quietly. He listened more than he spoke. He never interrupted. And beneath all that polish, she caught glimpses of something raw, the flicker of sorrow that never fully left his eyes. It was during one of their late meetings in the conference room long after the others had gone home that the silence between them shifted. Samantha leaned back in her chair, pinching the bridge of her nose. We need a better outreach model for the South Bay schools. The existing plan doesn't consider transportation barriers or language access. You're right, Dimitri said, looking at the map on the wall. We'll fund a bilingual liaison program, 2 full-time hires, immediate deployment. She blinked. Just like that? He looked at her. If we're going to do this, let's do it right. There was a beat of quiet. She finally asked, why does this matter to you? I mean, really matter? He hesitated, then leaned forward, slightly. Because no one showed up for my sister. The words dropped like stones. Samantha waited, sensing that he wasn't finished. Tessa was 23, he said, voice low. Smart, articulate, funny. She had anxiety, sure, but nothing anyone labeled as dangerous. She got a job in New York, started building her life, and then one day, she didn't show up for work. The landlord found her. Samantha felt her heart twist. I blame myself, he continued. Still do sometimes. We had the money, the access, everything. But she was alone. And I didn't see it. Samantha reached for the cup in front of her but didn't lift it. What would you have done differently? Listened more, he said. Listened without trying to fix her? She nodded slowly. That's harder than it sounds. I know. He looked at her, his eyes dark and unreadable. What about you? You know more about trauma than most. Why? She hesitated, caught off guard by the directness. Her instinct was to deflect, but she didn't. My dad left when I was 7, she said. Said he was going out for groceries and never came back. My mum held everything together. 3 jobs, night school, no sleep. But it wore her down. I grew up watching someone I loved disappear slowly into exhaustion. It's why I notice the quiet ones, the ones who don't ask for help. Dimitri looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. She looked away first. It was the beginning of a new understanding. In each other, they found not just allies in a mission, but kindred spirits, 2 people carrying invisible wounds, shaped by absence. And while they didn't speak about it often, the awareness hovered between them, quietly knitting something fragile but real. Still, the world outside their shared mission had its own agenda. One morning, Samantha arrived at work to find an envelope slipped beneath her office door. No name. Just her own handwriting on a photocopied page. A journal entry from 5 years ago, one she'd submitted to a scholarship essay contest. The essay detailed her struggles with depression in high school and a failed suicide attempt. Her knees buckled as she read the circled lines. I felt invisible, like no one would notice if I stopped existing. She hadn't thought of that essay in years. The note attached was typed, "Careful what you let the public see. Some things are best buried." She didn't tell anyone at first, not Monica, not even Dimitri. She threw the envelope into the back of her desk drawer and tried to breathe through the rising dread, but it wasn't the last message. A few days later, a photo surfaced on social media. It showed her and Dimitri at a donor event, mid-conversation, leaning slightly toward each other. The caption was snide, San Diego's newest power couple, or just a strategic alliance. The image was harmless enough, but the tone wasn't. Samantha confronted Monica, who looked genuinely surprised. This wasn't us, Monica said, scrolling through her phone. But someone's trying to stir something up. Samantha nodded. I can handle it. But she wasn't sure she could. That night, as the building emptied and the fog rolled in from the sea, Samantha sat alone in the garden behind the center, her arms wrapped around her knees. She didn't cry. Instead, she went still, a silence born of survival. She didn't hear Dimitri approach until he spoke. You disappeared after the meeting. She turned her head slightly. Just needed air. He sat beside her on the bench, not too close. Someone sent me something, she said eventually. An old essay. Threatened to release it, and then the photo. He was quiet for a moment. Celine. She looked at him, confused. Who? My ex, he said. Celine Marquez. She's strategic and very good at making problems look like opportunities. She probably saw our work together and decided it made a compelling headline. Why would she do that? Because in her world, vulnerability is weakness, and association is currency. If she can't control it, she destroys it. Samantha absorbed the words. So what do we do? We stay the course, he said. We don't apologize for who we are. She studied him, his posture rigid with restraint, his eyes clouded with something deeper than concern. Are you afraid? She asked. He didn't lie. Yes, so am I. He reached over then, not to touch her, but to offer his presence like a lifeline. For a long time, they just sat there. Two people who had spent too long building walls, now quietly daring to leave the door open. By the time they stood to leave, something unspoken had passed between them. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was trust, and that sometimes was even more rare. The first sign that something had shifted came not with a confrontation, but with a silence. The kind that hovers just beneath polite smiles and lingering glances. The kind that fills rooms before words are even spoken. It started with a change in how people at the Shoreline Wellness Center looked at Samantha. Monica Lynn still treated her with respect, but the warmth had dulled. The other staff began offering clipped greetings, and the laughter that once echoed from break room corners seemed to hush when she entered. It wasn't overt. It was worse. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, enough to make her question whether she was imagining it. Then came the email, an anonymous message sent to the general inbox of the center, forwarded to Monica, and then discreetly shared with the board. A grainy photo of Samantha and Dimitri at a restaurant, seated in a booth against the backdrop of ocean light. He was leaning in. She was mid-laugh. And though nothing inappropriate had occurred, the intimacy was impossible to ignore. The subject line read, "Ethics breach. Relationship between donor and staff raises questions." The email didn't name its sender, but Samantha didn't need a signature. She felt it in her bones. Celine Marquez. Her presence entered like a perfume. Cloying, expensive, and entirely unwelcome. The ex-fiancé of Dimitri Alikos, Celine was a socialite with ambition braided into her DNA. The kind of woman who made connections like currency and treated rumors like weapons. Samantha had never met her, but her shadow loomed large now, and it moved fast. By the time Samantha walked into the Monday morning meeting, the tension had thickened. Monica met her with a level gaze. "We need to talk," she said quietly. Privately. They sat in Monica's office, blinds drawn, the door closed like a sealed vault. "We've received concerns," Monica began, her voice controlled but not unkind. "About the nature of your relationship with Mr. Alikos." Samantha's stomach dropped. "There is no relationship. Not like that." "I believe you," Monica said. "But perception matters here. You understand that, right?" Samantha nodded, but it felt like her throat had closed. "We've worked together on the trauma initiative. That's it. And the dinner last week? It was after a board meeting, public restaurant. We talked about donor reports and the kids' retreat program." Monica exhaled slowly. "I know what you've contributed, Samantha. I know who you are. But there are eyes on this now. Powerful ones." The rest of the day passed in fragments. Samantha did her rounds. She counseled a 15-year-old girl named Maya through her third panic attack of the month. She smiled through gritted teeth during a donor luncheon, and when she finally returned to her apartment, her hands were trembling. She didn't call Dimitri. Instead, she opened her laptop and searched Celine Marquez. The article spilled forward like floodwaters. Headlines about fashion lines, gala appearances, charity boards, high-profile breakups. But beneath the polished photos and media smiles was a pattern Samantha couldn't ignore. Public shaming. Anonymous tips. Silent withdrawals of support from those who crossed her. Celine played the long game. And she played to win. The official confrontation came 3 days later at the Regional Mental Health Conference in Santa Barbara. Samantha had just finished presenting on early intervention strategies when Dimitri found her backstage, jaw tight. "She's here," he said without preamble. "Celine?" He nodded. They walked through the conference halls, the buzz of academic chatter rising around them. Samantha spotted her before he said another word. A statuesque woman in a crimson dress surrounded by admirers and journalists. Celine turned. Their eyes met. Her smile was razor thin. "Dimitri," she purred, stepping forward. "Always a pleasure." "Celine," he replied, every syllable measured. "And this must be the girl," she said, eyes landing on Samantha like a dagger cloaked. In velvet. You know you look much younger in person. Or maybe it's just the humility. Samantha held her gaze steady. I've read about you. Oh, darling, Celine said, brushing imaginary lint from her designer sleeve. Don't believe everything you read, though I must say, you've made quite the impression. Front page gossip in less than a month. You're efficient. Dimitri's tone turned sharp. That's enough, she laughed lightly, as if he told a joke. I only mean to offer advice. This world we live in, the non-profit elite, the corporate saints, it's a delicate stage. One wrong move, and the spotlight burns. With that, she turned and disappeared into the crowd, trailing perfume and the scent of victory. Later that night, in the quiet of the hotel room, Samantha broke. She sat at the window, staring at the ocean beyond the glass, her chest tight with fury and shame. She wants to destroy you, she said without turning. She wants control, Dimitri replied. And she knows I'm beyond her reach now. Samantha turned then, the grief raw in her voice. But I'm not. He crossed the room and sat beside her, the distance between them closing in quiet inches. I'll protect you, he said. You can't, she whispered. Not from this. Not from people who think I slept my way into relevance. His jaw clenched. Then we tell the truth. To who? The world. Her voice cracked. They won't care. They'll twist it anyway. He was silent for a long moment. I'm not ashamed of you, he said. Tears welled in her eyes. But I'm ashamed of what this is doing to everything I've worked for. They didn't touch. They didn't kiss. They simply sat there, surrounded by the enormity of what it meant to be entangled in something real, something that no headline or whisper could define. In the morning, Samantha woke to find a message from Monica. We need to discuss your role. The board is under pressure. Please come in today. She showered, dressed, and drove without music, her mind already bracing for the inevitable. But when she walked into Monica's office, what she didn't expect was a folded letter placed gently in front of her. It was from the board. A recommendation, not yet a mandate, that she consider stepping down from her current projects until the situation calmed. No acknowledgement of merit, no recognition of contribution, just fear and optics. Samantha sat there, back straight, every part of her aching. I need time, she said quietly. Monica nodded. Take what you need. That evening she didn't. Go home. She drove instead to a hill overlooking the city, a place she used to visit in college when the world felt too loud. The lights below flickered like a constellation, sprawling and indifferent. She pulled out her phone, dialed, waited. Dimitri answered on the first ring. I need to ask you something, she said. Anything. If I walk away, will you understand? There was a pause. No, he said, but I'll still respect you. She closed her eyes. I want to believe we can fight this, but I don't want to lose who I am in the process. You won't, he said gently. That's what they want. That's what Celine wants. But we don't have to play by their rules. She let the silence stretch. Then maybe it's time, she said, to start writing our own. As the line went quiet, a strange calm settled over her. Samantha didn't have all the answers yet, but one thing had become clear. She had never asked for this war, but she would not run from it either. Rain drifted down like a curtain over San Diego, softening the skyline and blurring the city's sharp edges. Samantha stood at her apartment window, arms crossed tightly against her chest, as she watched the streaks slide down the glass. There was a kind of stillness in the air, the kind that arrived when a storm wasn't raging, but waiting. The letter from the board still sat unopened on her kitchen counter, beside a mug of cold coffee and a pile of files she no longer had the energy to review. It had been 3 days since Monica had delivered it, a formal invitation to take a voluntary leave of absence from her position at Shoreline Wellness Center. The language was clinical, softened by diplomatic phrasing. But Samantha knew what it meant. A quiet exit, a chance to disappear before anyone could call it a scandal. She hadn't spoken to Dimitri since the night on the hill. Their words had hung in the air like a promise and a goodbye all at once. There were things between them now that neither had asked for. A closeness forged not through intimacy but through pressure, exposure, and the unrelenting weight of perception. But more than that, there was fear, not of each other, of what they could become if they weren't careful. That afternoon, Samantha packed a small bag and drove north along the coast. The rain followed her, tapering off as she crossed into Oregon. The landscape changed, from ocean to forest, from noise to breath. Ashland greeted her like an old friend she hadn't seen in years, unchanged in all the ways that mattered. Her mother, Evelyn, opened the door of their modest cottage before she even knocked. There was no hesitation in her hug, no demand for explanation, just the soft reassurance of being known completely. "You didn't tell me you were coming," Evelyn said, brushing rain from her daughter's shoulders. "I didn't know I was," Samantha replied. They didn't talk much that night. Instead, they shared leftovers in mismatched bowls and watched a documentary on hummingbirds without really paying attention. It wasn't until the following morning, over coffee and silence, that Evelyn finally asked, "Is it your work?" Samantha nodded. "Yes and no. It's everything." Evelyn didn't push. She never had. Instead, she waited, as she always did, for the storm inside her daughter to find its voice. "I've spent so much of my life trying to build something good," Samantha said finally. "Something honest. And now it's like someone lit a match and everything's smoke." Evelyn reached across the table, took her hand gently. "Smoke clears." "I don't know who I am when the smoke clears," Samantha whispered. "I don't know if the people I trusted, the people I worked for, will even let me rebuild." "You're not rebuilding for them," Evelyn said. "You're rebuilding for you." Outside, the rain began again, steady against the windows. That evening, as Samantha curled on the couch in her old bedroom, her phone buzzed. She didn't recognize the number at first, but the message that followed pulled her upright. "You're not alone in this. Let me explain what you never knew." Her fingers trembled as she typed her reply. "Now's not the time." The response came instantly. "It's never the time." That's how people like her win. Samantha closed her eyes. She could still see his face that last night, as the tension at his temples, the pain behind the steadiness. She knew Dimitri wasn't the enemy, but standing beside him had painted a target on her back, and she wasn't sure how many arrows she had left to take. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she opened an old box from her college years, buried beneath books and forgotten notebooks. Inside was the journal she'd kept the year she'd won the Tessa Alekos Memorial Scholarship, the same journal that held the original version of the essay now being weaponized against her. As she flipped through the worn pages, she found the sentence that had once terrified her to write. "There were days I didn't want to live, but I wrote instead." It was the first time she'd told the truth to anyone, even herself. And now someone wanted her to regret it. She didn't. The next morning, Samantha drove to a small cafe downtown, ordered tea, and opened her laptop. She wrote for 3 hours straight. Not a statement, not a defense, but a reckoning. She wrote about what it meant to be a woman in a space where power was always watching, what it meant to be vulnerable and visible at the same time, what it meant to tell the truth and still be accused of manipulation. She didn't send the letter, not yet, but she saved it, and it felt like a step forward. That afternoon she called Dimitri. "I'm in Ashland," she said. "I figured," he replied. There was a pause. "I wanted to tell you something," he continued. "Something I didn't tell you before." Samantha didn't interrupt. "The night I met you," he said, "wasn't the first time I saw you." She frowned. "What do you mean?" "A few years ago, someone on my team forwarded me an essay. It was anonymous, submitted to the foundation as part of a youth essay contest, but it stayed with me. It was raw, honest. I never forgot it." Her voice dropped. "That was mine?" "Yes," he said. "You wrote about watching your mother fight through burnout, about how the silence in your house was louder than shouting, and how you wanted to use your pain to make something better. I read it over and over. It reminded me of Tessa, of what we missed." Samantha's throat tightened. "I think," he said softly, "I was already looking for you. I just didn't know your name." She pressed the phone to her ear, closed her eyes. "I don't know what to do next," she admitted. "I don't want to give up, but I don't want to be defined by this mess either." "Then don't," he said. "Let's define it ourselves. Let's decide what happens next." That night, she sent her letter, not to Monica, not to the board, but to the editor of a national platform on trauma and mental health advocacy. She attached her name, her photo, her truth. 3 days later, it was published. The piece sparked immediate conversation. Hundreds of messages followed, some angry, many supportive. Women shared their own stories of being silenced. Therapists thanked her for saying what they couldn't. Survivors called her brave. The noise was loud, but for the first time, Samantha didn't feel buried beneath it. She felt heard. When Dimitri called the next evening, she answered on the first ring. "You did it," he said. "No," she replied, "we're just getting started." In that moment, for the first time in weeks, Samantha felt something unexpected. Hope. It wasn't certainty. It wasn't a solution. But it was solid, and she would build from there. The morning sun filtered through the gauzy curtains of Samantha's apartment, casting soft patterns on the hardwood floor. She sat at her kitchen table, nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee, her thoughts drifting to the events of the past few weeks. The whirlwind of emotions, the public scrutiny, and the revelations had left her feeling both exposed and empowered. Her phone buzzed, jolting her from her reverie. It was a message from Dimitri. "I need to see you. There's something I must tell. You." Her heart skipped a beat. The weight of unspoken truths hung between them, and she knew that whatever he had to share would be significant. They agreed to meet at a quiet cafe nestled in the heart of Balboa Park, a place where the city's hustle seemed to fade into the background. As she approached the cafe, she spotted Dimitri seated at a corner table, his posture tense, eyes fixed on the entrance. "Samantha," he greeted, standing as she approached. "Thank you for coming." She nodded, taking a seat opposite him. "You said you had something to tell me." He took a deep breath, his gaze steady. "It's about Celine." Samantha's stomach tightened at the mention of his ex-fiancée. "What about her?" Dimitri hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Celine and I were engaged for 2 years. Our relationship was complex. She was ambitious, driven, and had a vision for our future that aligned with her aspirations more than mine." Samantha listened intently, sensing the gravity of his confession. "After Tessa's death," he continued, "I was lost. Celine offered structure, a plan to channel my grief into something productive. She introduced me to the world of philanthropy, helped me establish the Alekos Foundation. But over time, I realized that her motivations weren't entirely altruistic." He paused, his eyes clouded with regret. "She saw the foundation as a means to elevate her social standing, to gain influence. When I began to diverge from her vision, focusing more on genuine impact rather than public image, tensions arose." Samantha absorbed his words, understanding the depth of betrayal he must have felt. "When I met you," Dimitri said, his voice softening, "I saw someone who genuinely cared, who wanted to make a difference without seeking recognition. It reminded me of why I started the foundation in the first place." A silence settled between them, filled with unspoken emotions. "I need you to know," he added, "that my feelings for you are real, but I also understand if this is too much." Samantha reached across the table, placing her hand over his. "Thank you for sharing this with me. It means a lot." They sat there, hands intertwined, finding solace in each other's presence amidst the chaos that surrounded them. As the days passed, Samantha found herself reflecting on their conversation. The revelations about Celine, the complexities of Dimitri's past, and the challenges they faced together. She realized that their bond had been forged not just through shared experiences, but through mutual understanding and trust. One evening, as she walked along the shoreline, the waves lapping at her feet, Samantha felt a sense of clarity. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with obstacles, but she knew that with Dimitri by her side, they could face whatever came their way. Their journey was far from over. But for the first time in a long while, Samantha felt hopeful about the future. It began with a phone call. Not from Dimitri, not from Monica, but from a number Samantha didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer. But something in her, perhaps a quiet instinct sharpened by recent battles, told her not to ignore. "It? Samantha Hale?" the voice asked. "Yes, this is she. My name is Alison Graves. I'm with the Office of Professional Integrity and Compliance. We received an anonymous tip about your previous employment at Shoreline Wellness Center. I was hoping you'd be willing to speak with us." The words dropped like ice in her bloodstream. That night, Samantha sat alone in her apartment, the city's lights blurring through the rain-streaked window. She didn't call Dimitri. Not yet. Instead, she replayed every moment from the last few months, wondering which one had cracked the silence wide open. 2 days later, she found herself seated in a plain office, across from 2 women in suits and clipped voices. They weren't cruel. They were clinical, and perhaps that was worse. They asked about timelines, about the nature of her relationship with Dimitri, about whether any professional boundaries had been crossed. I was not in a romantic relationship. With Mr. Alekos while employed, Samantha said, her voice steady. And even now we maintain a level of professional decorum. Would you describe your departure from Shoreline as voluntary? One of them asked. She hesitated. No. I was strongly advised to step aside until I could be managed. They wrote that down without looking up. When the meeting ended, Samantha stepped out into the rain and stood beneath the overhang of the building, eyes closed, letting the water soak through her coat. She wanted to scream, to cry, to run. But mostly she wanted to reclaim her voice from the narrative others were writing around her. That evening she called Dimitri. They're opening a formal inquiry, she said, not waiting for hello. Someone tipped them off anonymously, said I was involved in unethical conduct, that I compromised the objectivity of my work. Celine, he said. Samantha didn't answer. She didn't have to. Let me handle this, he added. No. Her voice cracked but didn't break. No more hiding behind other people's shields. I want to do this the right way. My way. There was silence on the line. Then I'll support you, Dimitri said. Whatever that looks like. Support, it turned out, came in many forms. Dimitri used his network to locate a respected ethics advocate, someone with deep ties to both legal oversight and corporate reform. Together, they crafted a public statement. Not a denial, not a rebuttal, but a declaration. Samantha was going to share her story, on her terms. The article was published through a national investigative journalism platform. It laid out the timeline, the false narrative constructed by Celine, and the culture of fear that allowed reputations to be dismantled based on innuendo. Samantha didn't name anyone, but her words cut sharper than any direct accusation. I didn't fall from grace, she wrote. I was pushed, by whispers, by discomfort with a woman who refused to apologize for her ambition or her grief. But I've stopped waiting for permission to stand up. The backlash was immediate and polarizing. Some accused her of over-dramatizing. Others lauded her courage. The comment sections filled with women, especially professionals in male-dominated fields, who echoed her experience with eerie similarity. And in the heart of it all, Samantha found something she hadn't felt in weeks. Purpose. The Shoreline Board, under public scrutiny, released a carefully worded statement acknowledging the investigation and their unwavering commitment to equity and employee support. But behind the scenes, a different kind of dialogue began. Staff who had once avoided her began to reach out privately, sharing stories of their own, offering apologies, asking what they could do. One of them was Sophia, a junior therapist Samantha had mentored in her first weeks. I'm sorry, Sophia's message read. I didn't speak up when I should have, I was afraid, but I see now what you were up against, and I want to help. It wasn't redemption, but it was the beginning of restoration. A week later, Samantha received another message, this time from a woman named Laura, a young intern from a small community clinic in Fresno. Your story gave me the courage to file a complaint, she wrote. I didn't think anyone would believe me, but you made me believe in myself. Samantha cried when she read that. Meanwhile, Dimitri had been quietly building something of his own. Using his foundation's platform, he launched a new initiative, not for trauma recovery this time, but for workplace justice. It was called the Hale Accord. When he told her about the name, Samantha protested. You can't name it after me, she said, half laughing, half terrified. I didn't, he replied. I named it after the version of you who kept showing up. The version who never stopped, fighting. The two of them became unlikely symbols of something bigger than the scandal. They became the example of what could happen when you refused to collapse under public shame. Not perfection, but persistence. The victory, though, didn't arrive with celebration. It came quietly. Samantha was reinstated at Shoreline, but she declined the offer. Instead, she accepted a position with a national nonprofit focused on ethics reform. They asked her to help lead a task force to investigate systemic silencing in mental health organizations. She said yes without hesitation. And just like that, she was no longer the girl who woke up in a stranger's bed with no memory. She was the woman building a world where that kind of fear wouldn't thrive. On a cool evening in April, Samantha and Dimitri stood side by side at the launch event for the Hale Accord. It was hosted in a modest venue, intentionally, and attended by activists, survivors, clinicians, and allies from across the country. When Samantha took the stage, she looked out at the faces before her and spoke not as a victim, not as someone reclaiming a broken reputation, but as someone who had stepped into her truth. Shame doesn't live in the truth, she said. It lives in silence. And I refuse to be quiet anymore. Dimitri met her at the edge of the stage when she finished, his eyes proud, full of something deeper than admiration. I told you, he whispered. This was only the beginning. Samantha smiled, not with relief, but with certainty. The first snowfall dusted the streets of Boston like powdered sugar, softening the sharpness of glass and concrete, muting the usual clatter of the city. Inside the grand ballroom of the Crown Regent, a different kind of storm was gathering. The air buzzed with whispered names, clinking glasses, and the not-so-subtle weight of anticipation. Samantha Hale stood near the entrance, heart steady despite the storm she knew was coming. Tonight was the keynote gala for the National Corporate Ethics Summit, the closing event of a gathering that had brought together leaders, reformers, whistleblowers, and corporate watchdogs from every sector. Samantha had been invited as the final speaker, her story now symbolic of the very work the summit was attempting to promote. It was an honor, yes, but also a warning. Every eye would be watching, not just for inspiration, but for weakness. Dimitri stood beside her, immaculately dressed in a midnight blue suit, his hand resting lightly on her lower back. He'd insisted they attend together, not as a statement, but as a truth. Ready? He asked quietly. She turned toward him, her voice calm. I've been ready for longer than they've been listening. A moment later, the coordinator signaled her. She moved toward the stage, heels silent against the polished floor. As the spotlight found her, she took a breath and stepped into it. Not to perform, but to illuminate. I never wanted to become a symbol, she began, voice echoing across the grand ballroom. Most of us don't. We just want to do our jobs, tell the truth, and be left in peace. But peace doesn't come when truth threatens power. The room went still. When I wrote publicly about what happened to me, I didn't do it because I was brave. I did it because I was tired of watching people get punished for being human. Samantha paused, meeting the gaze of a woman in the front row, a senior executive from a major tech firm who had faced her own storm of allegations and silence. There was a flicker of recognition between them. Shared ground. I was threatened, pushed out, questioned, dissected. But I was never silenced, because I knew the moment I stopped speaking was the moment they'd win. Applause rippled through the room. The problem isn't the presence of scandal, she continued. It's the absence of accountability, the fear that telling the truth will cost more than bearing it. She closed with words she hadn't written until that very afternoon, standing at the window of her hotel room, snow curling past the glass like fate itself. Power that cannot tolerate honesty isn't power. It's insecurity wrapped in money, and I refuse to make myself small for it. When she stepped off the stage, the applause was thunderous. Not polite, not performative, but visceral. A standing ovation from hundreds of people who knew how rare it was to hear that kind of truth in a room full of suits. Dimitri met her halfway, pulling her into a quiet hallway while the crowd began to shift toward dinner. You were extraordinary, he said, brushing her hair gently from her face. I was terrified, she admitted, breath-catching. And still, he said, you didn't flinch. They shared a moment of quiet, wrapped in the warm halo of proximity, before Helena approached. Dimitri's sister had flown in from Greece to attend the summit and had been helping to expand the global branch of the Hale Accord, a mission that had become just as personal for her. You shook them, Helena said, offering Samantha a glass of champagne. Good. Later, as they sat through speeches and dinners, something inside Samantha shifted. She was no longer just defending her name. She was helping shape a movement. She was no longer the girl who needed to explain how she got into the penthouse of a stranger in Barcelona. She was the woman reshaping what that story meant. When the evening ended, Dimitri took her hand and led her through the service entrance, away from the cameras. They walked the streets of Boston in silence, coats wrapped tight, breath visible in the cold. Do you remember, he asked, in what I told you that morning in Barcelona? She thought for a moment. You told me I was safe, that you wouldn't leave me vulnerable, he nodded. I meant it, but I didn't know then that you'd be the one keeping me honest. They stopped beneath a street lamp where snow clung to the glass in tiny constellations. Samantha looked up at him, her expression unguarded. What now, she asked. He smiled, soft and sure. Now we build. Not on fear, not on secrecy, but on everything we've learned. You've changed the way people think. Let's change the way they act. He pulled out a folded document from his coat pocket. The Boston Initiative, a new wing of the Hale Accord. Jobs, mental health support, legal aid, all run through the old Marcus estate. She transferred it to a shell firm months ago. We bought it yesterday. Samantha stared at him, heart aching with a strange kind of peace. You're turning her legacy into a sanctuary, he shrugged. We all deserve a second draft. The moon hung above them like a witness. Snow fell quietly. And somewhere between the lights and the silence, Samantha reached for his hand again. Not because she needed to be held, but because they had become stronger in each other's light. As they walked back to their hotel, she thought of everyone who had watched her fall, those who had whispered, who had judged, and then she let them go. Because she knew now, falling wasn't the end. It was how she learned to rise. Winter gave way to a gentle spring. In the city that had once nearly broken her, Samantha found herself blooming. Not in grand triumphant gestures, but in quiet, meaningful ones. The headlines had faded, the whispers had slowed. But what remained was the steady, unshakable truth she and Dimitri had built between them. They moved into a modest townhome just outside Boston, a space with wide windows, wooden floors, and more light than they could have dreamed of. It wasn't a palace. It wasn't a statement. It was a beginning. Boxes were still half unpacked. Books leaned in piles against the walls. The scent of fresh paint lingered in the hallway. It was imperfect, and it was theirs. In the mornings, Samantha sat by the kitchen window with her coffee, laptop open, fingers flying over keys as she drafted her proposal for a new ethics curriculum to be implemented in universities nationwide. Dimitri, meanwhile, had taken to cooking, badly but enthusiastically, determined to master breakfast beyond toast and espresso. They moved around each other like music, no longer clinging to the idea of needing to be perfect. Just honest. Just real. One Saturday afternoon, they hosted a small gathering of colleagues and friends. It was informal, potluck style, no speeches, and yet by the time the sun began to set, the backyard echoed with the kind of laughter that comes from having earned your joy. Helena was there, arms folded, watching them from the porch with a sly smile. She caught Samantha's eye and raised her glass. You're building a home, she said later, as they stood together by the fire pit, the sky streaked in pink and orange. I didn't think I ever would, Samantha admitted. You didn't. Think you were allowed, Helena corrected gently. The night wore on, and as the guests began to trickle out, Dimitri pulled Samantha aside. They walked down to the quiet garden patch they'd begun planting. Basil, lavender, small tomato stalks trying their best to thrive in the unpredictable New England weather. He handed her a small envelope. Something I've been meaning to ask, he said. Inside was a folded letter. Not a ring, not yet, but something more profound. A proposal to partner fully, both personally and professionally, in establishing a foundation they would co-lead, not under his name or hers, but under the shared principle they'd fought for. Truth, access, equity, and the belief that survivors, not systems, should determine the narrative. Her throat tightened as she read. I don't want us to be a footnote in someone else's success story, he said quietly. I want us to write our own. She folded the letter back into its envelope, looked up at him with eyes that had known pain and were still wide open to love. Then let's begin. In the weeks that followed, they traveled, first to Athens, to visit the rehabilitation shelter Helena had helped fund, then to Barcelona, where they stood outside the Rivoli Hotel for the first time since the night they met. Samantha looked up at its windows, remembering the girl who'd woken up scared and confused, unsure of what had happened to her. What would happen next? She was me, she said, but I don't think she ever imagined I'd be me. Dimitri slid his hand into hers. She survived. You rebuilt. By summer, the Hale Alekos Foundation launched its first international collaboration, partnering with NGOs to provide trauma-informed training to corporate leadership teams across 6 countries. Samantha spoke not as a cautionary tale, but as proof of what resilience could look like when met with resources, respect, and relentless belief. She and Dimitri worked in tandem. He the strategist, she the heartbeat. When he stumbled, she steadied. When she wavered, he held ground. Their differences, once seen as liabilities, became their edge. A billionaire with a history of silence, a therapist with a history of being silenced. Together they became louder than shame. Late one night, months after the foundation had launched, They sat on the rooftop of their home, a blanket around their shoulders and a notebook between them. They'd made it a habit, writing down lessons learned, ideas sparked in quiet moments. That night, Samantha wrote a single sentence. Strength isn't loud. It's the decision to wake up and try again, even when the world is still watching. Dimitri watched her write it, then underlined the word try. You always think trying is weak, she teased. No, he said. I think trying is brave, especially when it's done publicly. The wind shifted. A soft breeze danced across her skin. She leaned into him, letting her head rest on his shoulder. Do you ever wonder, she asked, what would have happened if I'd never walked into your life? All the time, he said. And every time, I thank God I don't have to live in that version of my story. They didn't marry right away. They didn't need to. Their bond was not defined by ceremony but by choice, repeated daily with every risk taken, every truth spoken, every fight not walked away from. By the time the year turned, they had spoken. At 7 global summits, helped pass 2 ethics reform bills, and stood beside hundreds of women who, inspired by their story, had stepped forward not just to survive, but to lead. But the most meaningful moments were always the smallest. Sunday mornings in mismatched pajamas. Late-night phone calls from trauma centers halfway around the world. Dimitri learning how to fold laundry the way Samantha liked. Samantha learning how to trust that not every silence meant abandonment. They healed not by pretending the past hadn't happened, but by building something stronger than its weight. And though the world never stopped watching, they stopped needing it to approve. In the end, Samantha Hale didn't just find herself after everything was stripped away. She redefined herself, not as the woman who stumbled into power, but as the one who transformed it. The story didn't end in scandal. It didn't end in surrender. It ended as all honest stories do, not with finality but with hope. Hope that love, when rooted in truth, can outlast shame. Hope that standing up once is enough to teach you how to rise again. And hope that sometimes the most powerful stories begin not when you fall, but when you decide to get back up. Together. It started with an encrypted email. Samantha was reviewing a funding proposal late one evening when the message arrived in her inbox marked confidential, urgent. The sender was unfamiliar, the subject line vague. At first she almost deleted it, assuming it was phishing. But something about the tone, the clipped urgency of it, made her pause. She clicked. Inside was a single sentence followed by a PDF attachment. You need to see this before your foundation signs the Seaglass contract. Your name is being used. Her heart pounded as she downloaded the file. The document was a scanned internal memo, dated 2 weeks earlier from a strategic investment firm that had pledged to partner with the Hale Alekos Foundation on their new youth mental health initiative in Asia. It outlined an alternate acquisition strategy that would route millions of donor dollars into a shadow company registered in Cyprus. The name at the bottom of the contract, Samantha Hale, forged. The signature was perfect. Her pen stroke, her style, even the exact scroll she used when she was in a rush. She stared at it, numb, as cold panic spread down her spine. She called Dimitri. He answered immediately. Hey, love, we've been compromised, she interrupted, voice shaking. There's a forged contract with my name on it. The Seaglass partners aren't who they say they are, and they're using our foundation. There was silence on the other end, followed by the rustle of him grabbing his laptop. Email it to me now. Don't call anyone else yet. We need to confirm if anyone inside helped them. The realization hit her all at once. Someone on their team had betrayed them. And worse, if the document went public before they could expose the fraud, it would look like Samantha was siphoning funds. That everything they'd built together was a facade. We've been building a story about truth, she whispered, and they're about to turn it into a lie. Dimitri's voice was cold steel. Not if we get ahead of them. Over the next 48 hours, they worked around the clock, tracing the financial threads and digging through internal communications. With Helena's help and a trusted forensic accountant, they uncovered the source. Their deputy finance director, recently hired, had once worked for a holding group connected to Celine Marquez. The betrayal cut deep. She didn't disappear, Samantha said bitterly. She went underground, and she's still playing. Dimitri nodded grimly. She doesn't care about exposure. She wants to destroy everything we stand for, slowly, quietly, with just enough evidence to cast doubt. It was a masterstroke. If they went public without airtight proof, it would look like deflection. If they stayed silent, the forged contract would eventually surface and Samantha's name would be dragged through scandal again. "We need to go to the authorities," she said. "No," Dimitri said. "We go to the press. We control the narrative before she can." And so, for the second time, Samantha sat before a room of journalists, not to share her trauma, but to defend her integrity. She presented the findings, the evidence of the forgery, the bank trail linking it back to Marquez's shell companies. But this time she didn't flinch. "I've been here before," she said. "I know what it feels like to be questioned, to be doubted. But if telling the truth made me a target once, let this be the moment where we show the world it's still worth it." The headlines exploded within hours. Hale Alekos Foundation uncovers international fraud plot, corporate. Whistleblower saves millions. Celine's network was exposed. Arrests were made in 3 countries. And Samantha once again had faced the fire and refused to burn. But something changed after that. This time, people didn't just believe her, they followed her. She became more than a voice. She became a force. If you were moved by Samantha's strength, inspired by her fight for truth, and curious about what comes next, there's so much more ahead. Will Dimitri finally propose? Will Samantha's foundation grow beyond what they imagined? Or will another shadow from the past return to test them? Don't miss the next emotional chapter. Subscribe to the channel to stay updated and help us keep bringing you more powerful, unforgettable stories like this one.